The ship rocked harder and harder as the waves got larger and larger. The captain, unsure of what to do, ordered the engines turned off, and the ship was left a sitting duck. The typhoon would show no mercy as the skies only darkened and the weather only worsened. In just half an hour's time, the ship would be belly up, and her passengers scattered about in the sea, fighting for their lives. But could this have been avoided? Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Unfortunately for us, there's little information about Doña Marilyn before her sinking. This is common in many ship sinkings I look into, as the majority of people are interested primarily in the sinking rather than the ship's history. However, I will share what I could find. She was originally built in Japan as the ferry Otohime Maru in 1966 for the RKK line in Onomichi Dockyard, and had an uneventful career as far as I can tell. She was retired from her Japanese service and purchased by Sulpicio Lines in the Philippines in 1976, being renamed MV Doña Ana. Her maiden voyage for Sulpicio Lines was on June 26, 1977, and this year of her career appears to have been uneventful. She suffered a massive, horrific fire on October 8, 1978, and underwent refitting. After this, she needed a rebrand, and being put back into service as the Doña Marilyn. Keep in mind that ferries in the Philippines, particularly with the Sulpicio Lines, are notorious for suffering from poor maintenance, poorly trained crews, overcrowding of passengers, and lack of regulations. Sulpicio Lines had numerous sinkings and incidents, including the sinkings of Princess of the Stars, Princess of the Orient, Doña Marilyn, and Doña Paz, with the Doña Paz being the worst peacetime maritime disaster in history in terms of lives lost. They also had the Sulpicio Express 7, a ship that was involved in the collision with the ferry MV St. Thomas Aquinas, and that led to the horrifying sinking of the latter. Due to the numerous incidents and poor regulations, in 2009 Sulpicio Lines rebranded and is now the Philippine Span Asia Carrier Corporation, and in 2015 they were barred from passenger service. Before we really dive into the loss of the Doña Marilyn, let's look at her specs. She was a passenger ferry ship, with her tonnages sitting at 2,947 gross registered tons and 3,002 deadweight tons, which is how much weight a ship can carry, including cargo, fuel, fresh water, ballast water, provisions, passengers, and crew. She was 320 feet long and had a beam of 43 feet wide. She had capacity for 807 passengers. As for propulsion, since she was built in Japan, she had Japanese machinery, including one Niigata Ironworks MHT54S 4-stroke diesel engine capable of producing 4,500 horsepower that turned one single 4-bladed propeller. With this setup, she averaged speeds of 21 knots. She should have been set up for success, but it would all end in disaster. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comment section below. Okay folks, it's time to get into the sinking. The MV Doña Marilyn left Manila on October 23, 1988 at 10 a.m. heading for Tacloban City in eastern Visayas. Including the ship's crew, 511 people were on board total. According to Vicente Gambito, the vice president of Sulpicio Lines at the time, there were a total of 421 passengers. The ship's captain, Eliodoro Salgado Jr., had been with Sulpicio Lines for just 5 short months when he was in charge of MV Doña Marilyn for this voyage. Departure was as expected, and so were the first few hours at sea. Typhoons and stormy seas are normal this time of year for the Philippines, and one was on the horizon. On October 24th at 2:14 a.m., Captain Salgado sent a message to the coastal station of Sulpicio Lines in Manila about large waves encountered by the ship, with him deciding to slow the engine. At 7:28 a.m., Salgado had the engines completely stopped due to, quote, very strong winds and big waves. Almost an hour later, the captain informed the station that he decided to reverse course and head toward the North Gigantes Island for safety, while adding that the ship was expected to arrive at Tacloban at 8 p.m. later that day. To me, that's already a red flag. He's reiterating his estimated arrival time, and that can signal that he might doubt whether they will make it on time or at all. About 5 hours later at 1:30 p.m., the Doña Marilyn radioed a distress signal off Tanguingui Island, earlier reported as Manic Island, close to Masbate, which was the last signal from the ferry received by the station according to military officials. Typhoon Ruby, locally known as Typhoon Unsong, had rolled in and the seas were stirred up violently. The ship struggled in the seas, as many ships and especially ferries do. Ro-ro ferries have open car decks that are susceptible to the free surface effect, which is the destabilization of a ship when water sloshes on the car deck, and this causes capsizing. Regular ferries still have very open cargo spaces and typically a higher air draft than most ships, meaning more of the ship is above water than seen on other types of ships, and this opens them up for deep stabilization and capsizing as well, especially in adverse weather. To be fair, in the worst weather conditions, almost all ships are at risk of capsizing or sinking. And this is exactly what happened to MV Doña Marilyn, as she became overwhelmed by the strong winds and massive waves caused by Typhoon Unsong, and at 2 p.m. on October 24, 1988, she capsized. The worst was yet to come for the victims and survivors, as the typhoon still raged, and they had to face the angry seas. According to survivors' accounts, Captain Salgado bid them to pray the rosary before he jumped ship, but he eventually went missing. Many who survived were easily spotted by rescuers due to their life jackets, but others were saved by fishermen passing by. Some survivors were robbed by bandits with motorized canoes. One survivor, the ship's purser Kerwin Lim, did reach the shore of Almagro Island after nearly a day at sea, but unfortunately, he was later found robbed and murdered with red marks on his neck. There were conflicting reports on the exact number of survivors of the disaster. Martina Mercado of the DSWD reported 181, while Routers reported at least 205 survived. Vincente Gambito, Sulpicio Line's vice president at the time, placed the figure at 197. According to Gambito, 46 of the survivors were not on the ship's manifest, while Lynette Ordonez of the Manila Standard stated that it was at least 101 that were not on the manifest. The Doña Marilyn Survivors Association was established after the incident, with survivor Alex Motoron Jr. as its president. The estimated dead and missing sits at around 400. Rest in peace to all of those who lost their lives in this tragic accident, and may their loved ones and the survivors find peace and true justice. This sinking is absolutely infuriating to me for a multitude of reasons, and as we look into the inquiry, you'll see why. During the Senate's inquiry into the capsizing, evidence like the logbook of Sulpicio Lines was presented. Senator John Osmeña argued that because the shipping line and the Coast Guard knew about a typhoon nearing Tacloban from Pagasa, or the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration, they should have been able to properly advise Captain Salgado to turn away from its destination before the typhoon reached signal number 3, which signals a tropical cyclone of wind speeds from 55 miles per hour to 73 miles per hour that are expected within 18 hours. Think of it like the category scale used for hurricanes. It's different measurements for both, but both are on a scale of 1 to 5. Do you see why I'm angry? This whole thing could have been avoided had the captain had the information he needed, and, in my opinion, Sulpicio Lines proved once more that they did not value passenger safety as much as they should have. Negligence like this always grinds my gears, and it happens more often than we think. Despite the lessons that are taught to humanity over time, the same disasters seem to echo one another time and time again. Like I've always been taught, if you do not learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. This is why maritime history and maritime safety is so crucial to learn, and it's unfortunately not taught in the local schools in my landlocked area, but both should be. Alright, I'll get off my soapbox for now. But thanks to our lovely members, I have a soapbox to stand upon. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay everyone, let's continue with the nitty-gritty details of the aftermath. On October 31st, Halloween, Corazon Alma de Leon from the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, stated that Sulpicio Lines had agreed to provide 50,000 Philippine pesos to each of the families of those who perished. Personally, if it was me and I'd lost loved ones in the sinking, I'd tell them where to stuff their 50,000 pesos, but that's just me. 2 days after this agreement, after Transportation and Communications Secretary Reiniro Reyes met with President Corazon Aquino, Reyes announced an indefinite suspension of all ferries operated by Sulpicio Lines from leaving their respective ports. Sulpicio Lines defied this order because money and continued operating, demanding a formal order to be given to them before they suspend ferry operations. Eventually, an interagency committee was formed on November 5th to inspect all commercial Philippine vessels regardless of shipping line, and on the same day grounded all ships of Sulpicio Lines as it inspected the line's MV Cotabato Princess ferry. A few days after the committee was formed, the National Telecommunications Commission, or NTC, suspended 14 further cargo and passenger vessels after inspecting 216 of them across the country due to malfunctioning navigational and communication facilities, so as to heighten the safety standards for seafaring vessels after the loss of Doña Marilyn. 3 weeks after the ship's sinking, Eliodoro Salgado Sr., the father of Captain Salgado, offered to help the National Bureau of Investigation, or NBI, under Ramon Berrot in finding his son, who at the time was reportedly hiding in Maripipi Island in the province of Biliran. Some survivors, like Alex Moron Jr., claimed seeing him board a life raft after he abandoned ship. Soon after this, NBI senior agent Zosimo Pebrero confirmed Captain Salgado's presence in Barangay Orog, Maripipi, and a monetary reward of 50,000 Philippine pesos was set for whoever was able to capture him. Let the bounty hunting begin. According to Speak Pro Tempore Antonio Cuenco, who was leading the search for the captain, barangay officials refused to cooperate with NBI officials when they arrived on the island, and stated that he could be compelled to request for their arrests if necessary. As far as I can tell, he was never arrested, nor did he face the homicide through reckless imprudence charges that were to be brought against him. And that, my friends, also makes me incredibly angry. The wreck of MV Doña Marilyn was first sighted by a fisherman named Bonifacio Rodrigo, who reportedly saw the sunken vessel on November 10, 1988, while he was diving in an area near Manac Island, also known as La Manac Island. Her wreck lies off the island of Malapascua, where it has been made into a diving attraction. She rests in 108.3 feet of water on her starboard side. It's been reported that the wreck site has had some of its features missing due to illegal salvaging for scrap metal selling. This is where we leave her, alone in the ocean as a tourist attraction. As for the victims, I hope they rest in peace, and that their loved ones and the survivors can one day get true justice for this horrific tragedy. The beautiful Cunard ocean liner echoed her namesake as she sat at Liverpool awaiting her maiden voyage, smoke pouring from her 2 funnels. Her captain viewed her over, having seen her predecessor to the scrapyard just 4 years prior. A bright future was supposed to be ahead of her, but instead, she'd find herself in the epicenter for the largest world conflict in the history of man, leaving her future uncertain. In next week's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we get into the story of RMS Mauritania 2.